The rain hammered relentlessly against the asphalt as Andre drove down the deserted street, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers was the only sound in the car, barely cutting through the heavy tension in the air. He was exhausted, his mind clouded by the day's weight, but all he wanted was the quiet solace of home. Then, out of nowhere, the blinding flash of red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror, shattering the fragile silence. His chest tightened as he sighed deeply, knowing this wasn't a routine stop. The familiar pang of dread crept in, a feeling he had experienced far too often. Andre pulled over, carefully signaling his intentions, and rolled down the window as the icy rain stung his face. The officer's boots crunched against the wet pavement, each step deliberate and heavy with authority. "License and registration," the officer barked, his tone laced with suspicion. Andre's calm reply was met with cold arrogance, and the situation escalated faster than he imagined. What was supposed to be a simple traffic stop spiraled into a confrontation that would change everything. Before we dive deeper into Andre's gripping story of courage, corruption, and justice, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from today. If this story intrigues you and you want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's explore this powerful tale together. The night was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt, and Andre navigated the quiet suburban streets, the rhythm of his windshield wipers barely keeping up with the drizzle. Street lights cast golden halos on the wet pavement, their reflections shimmering like restless ghosts. It had been a long day that drained every ounce of energy, leaving Andre with a foggy mind and a deep yearning for home. As he drove, thoughts of a warm cup of tea and a moment of silence in his small apartment filled his mind. The muted hum of his car's engine was the only sound accompanying him until a sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror jolted him back to reality. Andre sighed deeply. He knew this routine all too well. With practiced ease, he checked his speedometer. 32 miles per hour, perfectly legal. His taillights worked, and his registration was up to date. There was no reason for him to be stopped. No reason except one. Signaling carefully, Andre pulled over to the side of the road. The damp night air seeped into the car as he rolled down his window. A faint unease crept into his chest, familiar and unwelcome. The crunch of boots on wet pavement announced the officer's approach, whose commanding presence was as deliberate as intimidating. "License and registration," the officer barked before Andre could offer a greeting. Andre turned to see him, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing an unmistakable smirk. The name on his badge read Carter. "Good evening, officer," Andre said, keeping his tone calm. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Carter narrowed his eyes, his expression daring Andre to argue. "You were driving suspiciously slow." Andre suppressed a bitter laugh. "Suspiciously slow? In this rain?" "It's raining," he replied evenly, motioning toward the windshield. "I'm just being cautious." Carter leaned closer, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto the car door. "Cautious, huh?" His tone dripped with condescension. "What are you hiding, pal?" Andre bristled at the word pal, delivered with enough disdain to fill the damp air between them. He clenched his jaw, pushing down the flash of anger, threatening to rise. "Officer, I have nothing to hide," Andre said, moving deliberately as he reached for the glove compartment to retrieve his registration. He handed over his license and paperwork, and he watched as Carter snatched them and returned to his cruiser. The rain drummed softly on the car's roof, but the sound did little to calm Andre's nerves. In his side mirror, he saw Carter speaking into his radio and glancing back toward Andre's car with annoyance. When Carter returned, his demeanor had soured further. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Andre frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "What's the reason, officer?" "I haven't done anything wrong." "Step out," Carter repeated, his tone icy. With a sigh, Andre unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The cold drizzle greeted him, soaking into his jacket as he stepped onto the slick pavement. "Open the trunk," Carter said, motioning toward the back of the car. "With all due respect, officer, you need a warrant for that," Andre replied, his voice firm. Carter smirked, a predatory gleam in his eye. "You see, that's where you're wrong. I can search whatever I damn well please." Andre stood his ground. "Actually, no, you can't." But Carter wasn't listening. Ignoring Andre's protest, he moved to the back of the car, jingling his keys as if preparing to break into the trunk. Andre's fists clenched, his body taut with tension. This wasn't just a search but a power play, a deliberate attempt to assert control. The trunk opened with a metallic pop. Andre felt the weight of the moment settles on his shoulders. He knew what Carter was doing, which was far from standard procedure. Inside, neatly tucked in the corner, was a sleek black briefcase. Carter's smirk deepened, curiosity flickering across his face as he reached for it. "It's private property," Andre said sharply, stepping forward. "You have no right." But Carter ignored him, flipping open the case with a soft click. The smirk froze on his face when his eyes landed on the documents inside. For a second, time seemed to stand still. The rain fell steadily, a relentless rhythm against the tense silence. Carter's face paled as he scanned the first page. His arrogance faltered, replaced by confusion and something close to fear. Andre folded his arms, leaning casually against the car. "Something catches your eye, officer?" Carter's hands trembled as he held the document closer, his eyes darting over the words. At the top of the page, in bold letters, was the header, "Notice of Termination." Beneath it, Carter's name was printed alongside a detailed list of offenses. What is this?" Carter muttered, his voice barely audible. Andre watched him, a quiet intensity in his gaze. "Exactly what it looks like," he replied. "Every complaint, every time you crossed the line, neatly documented." Carter flipped through the pages, his face redder with every line he read. His chest heaved as he tried to regain composure, but the weight of the truth was undeniable. The rain fell steadily, each drop tapping against the car's metal roof like a drumbeat of inevitability. Officer Carter stood motionless, staring at the open briefcase as if its contents were written in a language he couldn't quite understand, or perhaps one he wished he didn't. The papers inside weren't just documents. They were a career-ending dossier, meticulously detailed and impossible to ignore. Complaints from citizens, internal memos from the department, and transcripts of disciplinary hearings are tied together by one undeniable fact: Carter had a long history of abuse. Andre remained leaning against the car, his arms crossed, his posture casual. He didn't need to say anything, the power dynamic had already shifted. What is this?" Carter finally managed, his voice cracking. Andre tilted his head slightly, his gaze unflinching. "Like I said, officer, that is exactly what it looks like. Every time you thought you could get away with something, every complaint buried, every rule you broke, it's all there." Carter's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The edges of the documents crumpled under his grip, his frustration mounting with each line he read. His arrogance had drained away, leaving behind a man grasping at the last remnants of his control. This is illegal," Carter stammered, looking up at Andre with wild eyes. "You can't have this. Who gave you this? Who the hell do you think you are?" Andre straightened slightly, his calm demeanor never wavering. "The real question, officer, is why does this exist in the first place? If none were true, you wouldn't have anything to worry about, would you?" Carter's face flushed a deep red, veins bulging in his neck. He stepped closer, towering over Andre in a futile attempt to regain dominance. "You think this makes you smart? You think you can intimidate me with this crap?" Andre met his gaze with steady defiance. "I think it's about time someone held you accountable. You've gotten away with this for far too long." For a moment, Carter seemed ready to lash out, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. But then his eyes fell on something else in the briefcase. A small, nondescript USB drive tucked into a compartment. He snatched it up, holding it aloft like it was a weapon. "What's on this?" Carter demanded, his voice shaking with both anger and fear. Andre allowed a faint smile to cross his lips. "Videos, audio recordings, testimonies, everything tied to the reports in those files." Carter stared at the USB drive like a ticking time bomb, his mind racing with possibilities. The desperation in his eyes was unmistakable. He slammed the lid of the briefcase shut, as if closing it would somehow make the contents disappear. "You think you've got me cornered," Carter said, his tone low and dangerous. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I've got connections, people who can make this all go away. You're just another nobody trying to play hero." Andre didn't flinch. He had heard enough empty threats to know when someone was bluffing, and Carter's bluster reeked of desperation. "I think you're scared," Andre said, his voice calm but firm. "Not because of me, but because you know what happens when the truth comes out. People like you rely on fear to keep others silent. But tonight, I'm not playing by your rules." Before Carter could respond, a soft beep cut through the tension. Both men turned toward the source of the sound, the small, blinking red light on Andre's dashboard camera. Carter's eyes widened, his confidence unraveling further. "You've been recording this?" Andre unfolded his arms and gestured toward the camera. "From the moment you approached my car, every word, every action, it's all there." Carter's panic was palpable. He lunged toward the car, his hand outstretched as if to rip the camera from its mount, but Andre moved quickly, stepping between him and the vehicle. "Touch it," Andre said, his voice sharp as steel, "and you'll be adding tampering with evidence to that long list of offenses." Carter froze, his hand hovering in the air. The fury in his eyes was now mixed with a flicker of genuine fear. He was trapped, and he knew it. "You think this is over?" Carter growled, retreating a step but still bristling with anger. "You think you've won?" Andre remained composed, his gaze unwavering. "No, officer. This is just the beginning." The tension between them was electric, the rain continuing to fall in an unrelenting rhythm. Carter's mind was clearly racing, weighing his options as the reality of his situation sank in. For years, he had used his badge as a shield, a tool of unchecked authority. Now that shield was crumbling. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Carter let out a bitter laugh, though it was devoid of humor. He shook his head and turned away, retreating toward his patrol car. "You have no idea what you've started," Carter muttered, more to himself than to Andre. Andre watched him go, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he didn't let it show. He had taken a risk tonight, a gamble that could have gone very differently. But now, as Carter climbed into his cruiser and slammed the door behind him, Andre knew he had seized the upper hand. The rain continued to pour as Andre returned to his car. He reached for his phone, the live broadcast still running, and addressed his unseen audience. "To everyone watching," he said, his voice steady, "this isn't just about me. This is about holding people accountable, no matter who they are or what uniform they wear. No one is above the law." As he ended the broadcast, Andre felt a mix of emotions. Relief, determination, and a simmering anger at the injustice he had faced. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. Andre sat in the car, the rain cascading down the windshield like an unending curtain. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart still pounding from the confrontation with Officer Carter. The tension in his chest was slowly giving way to something else, a quiet but resolute determination. He reached over to the passenger seat and picked up his phone. Navigating to his contact list, he scrolled until he found the name Ella Martinez, a journalist known for her fearless investigations and uncompromising pursuit of the truth. Andre met Ella months ago during a community meeting where she spoke passionately about the importance of exposing corruption in law enforcement. His thumb hovered over the call button for a moment before he pressed it. The line rang twice before Ella's calm, familiar voice came through. "Andre, it's late. Is everything okay?" Andre exhaled deeply, realizing he had been holding his breath. "Ella, I have it. Everything we talked about. The files, the recordings, it's all here." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. When Ella spoke again, her tone was serious, almost urgent. "You're sure? All of it? Including Carter?" "All of it," Andre confirmed. "And I've recorded our encounter tonight. It's on video, every word, every threat." Another pause, and then Ella's voice took on a note of determination. "Where are you? I can meet you right now." "I'm just off Main Street, near the old gas station," Andre replied. "I'll text you the exact location." "Got it." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ella said, her voice steady but charged with energy. "And Andre, good job. You've done something important tonight." Andre hung up, a small sense of relief washing over him. Ella was the right person to handle this. If anyone could ensure the truth saw the light of day, it was her. The minutes ticked by as Andre sat in the car, the rain providing a steady soundtrack to his thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that Carter, or someone connected to him, might be lurking nearby. He forced himself to stay alert, his eyes scanning the deserted street. A knock on the window startled him. Andre turned quickly, his heart racing, but when he saw Ella standing outside, drenched from the rain, he immediately unlocked the door. She climbed into the passenger seat, shaking water from her jacket and brushing damp hair from her face. "You aren't kidding about the rain," she said with a small smile, setting her bag on the floor. Her eyes darted to the back seat, where the black briefcase sat, still closed. "Is that it?" Andre nodded. "That's it. Everything we need." Ella reached back and pulled the briefcase onto her lap, opening it with a sense of reverence. As her eyes scanned the documents inside, her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. This is incredible," she murmured, flipping through the neatly organized pages. "Andre, this isn't just evidence. This is a blueprint of his entire career. Every abuse of power, every cover-up. It's all here." Andre leaned back in his seat, watching her reaction. "I've been compiling this for weeks," he said quietly. "Talking to people, gathering their stories. Carter isn't just a bad cop. He's a symptom of a much bigger problem." Ella looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "You know what this means, right? Once this goes public, it's not just Carter. It's the entire department that's going to be under scrutiny. They'll fight back hard, Andre. They'll come after you." "I know," Andre said, his voice steady, "but I'm not backing down. People need to know the truth." Ella studied him for a moment, then nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "All right then, let's do this." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the documents and taking meticulous notes. The sound of the camera shutter and the rustle of paper filled the car as the two worked in tandem. "What's on the USB?" Ella asked after a while, holding up the small drive. "Footage from body cams, security cameras, and audio recordings," Andre explained. "Some of it is from officers who didn't want to come forward publicly, but wanted their stories heard." Ella's expression hardened. "This is going to shake the department to its core. You realize that, right?" "That's the point," Andre said firmly. The rain continued to fall as they worked, the car's interior illuminated only by the dim glow of the dashboard. Hours passed as they sifted through the evidence, cataloging each piece and cross-referencing it with the complaints. When they finally finished, Ella closed the briefcase and turned to Andre. "I'm going to take this back to the office and start writing. We'll publish the story tomorrow morning, but we need to be careful. Once Carter finds out about this, he'll come after you. Hard." "Let him," Andre said with quiet resolve. "I'm ready." Ella smiled with genuine warmth in her expression. "You've got guts, Andre. I'll give you that." She opened the door, the rain immediately soaking her again as she stepped out. "Stay safe," she said before closing the door behind her. Andre watched her disappear into the night, her figure fading into the downpour. For a moment, he sat in silence, the weight of what they had just done settling over him. The truth was now in the right hands, but he knew the battle was far from over. He started the car, the engine humming softly as he pulled onto the slick road. The briefcase was no longer in his possession, but the burden of its contents still lingered in his mind. The rain continued to fall, a steady reminder of the storm yet to come. But for the first time in a long time, Andre felt a glimmer of hope. The morning arrived with heavy clouds clinging stubbornly to the sky, their gray hues casting a somber tone over the city. Andre sat at his small kitchen table, a mug of steaming coffee between his hands, his thoughts racing as he replayed the events of the previous night. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath him. Ella had promised that the story would go live this morning. Andre's phone buzzed sporadically with notifications, but none were from her yet. He stared at the black screen, his nerves taut with anticipation. This wasn't just about exposing Officer Carter anymore. The story and its implications were much larger. Andre knew that taking down someone like Carter would ripple outward, challenging not just the officer but the entire network of complicity that had protected him. As he took another sip of coffee, a sharp knock on the door startled him. The sound reverberated through the quiet apartment, and Andre's pulse quickened. Setting his mug down, he rose slowly and moved toward the door, a small sense of unease creeping up his spine. When he opened it, Andre was met with the sight of a man in uniform, not Carter, but someone else. The officer had graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years of hard service. His eyes, though tired, held a glimmer of something unexpected. Understanding. "Morning," the man said, his voice low. The name tag on his chest read Harper. Andre tensed, his grip on the doorknob tightening. "Can I help you, officer?" Harper glanced over his shoulder as if checking to see if anyone had followed him before stepping closer. "I'm here because of what happened last night. Word's already spreading through the department, and it's not good." Andre raised an eyebrow, his unease sharpening. "Not good for who?" "For Carter," Harper replied, his expression grim. "But also for you. There are people higher up who aren't happy about what you've uncovered. And Carter, he's not someone who takes this kind of thing lying down." Andre crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I figured as much. What's he planning?" Harper sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "Desperation makes people dangerous. Carter's already making calls, trying to spin the narrative in his favor. He's claiming the evidence you have was obtained illegally, that it's all fabricated. He's rallying his allies, and believe me, he has plenty." Andre's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "And what about you? Why are you here?" The older officer hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because not everyone in the department is like Carter. Some of us have been watching him for years, waiting for a chance to see him held accountable. What you did last night, it's the first real crack in his armor. We want to help." Andre blinked, surprised. "Help how?" Harper stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "By making sure you stay safe, for starters, and by getting the truth out before they have a chance to bury it. Carter's not just going to come after you legally. If he feels cornered, he might do something reckless." Andre studied the man, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. But Harper's expression was earnest, his words weighted with the urgency of someone who knew the stakes all too well. "Why now?" Andre asked. "Why didn't you or anyone else come forward before this?" Harper's shoulders sagged slightly, and he let out a weary chuckle. "Fear, mostly. Carter has friends in high places, people who'd make life hell for anyone who dared to stand against him. But now, thanks to you, this isn't something he can keep quiet. The story's going public, and if we act fast, we can make sure it doesn't get buried." Andre nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. Harper wasn't offering blind loyalty or a simple alliance. This was about survival, not just for Andre, but for those within the department who had long been silenced by fear. "What do you need me to do?" Andre asked. Harper straightened, his resolve hardening. "Come with me. There are a few other officers who've been gathering evidence of their own. Complaints, reports, things that were swept under the rug. We're going to compile everything and make sure it gets to the right hands. No leaks, no half measures. Once it's out there, it needs to be undeniable." Andre grabbed his jacket, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew the risks were growing with every step he took, but he couldn't back down now. The ride to their meeting spot was tense, the city's rain-soaked streets passing by in a blur. Harper avoided main roads, taking back alleys and side streets as if they were being followed. Andre couldn't help but feel a gnawing paranoia creeping into his thoughts. Eventually, they arrived at an old community center, its peeling paint and boarded-up windows giving it an air of abandonment. Harper parked the car and gestured for Andre to follow him inside. The building smelled of mildew and damp wood, its dim interior illuminated only by the faint light filtering through cracked windows. Harper led Andre down a narrow hallway and into a small room where two other officers were waiting. "This is Andre," Harper said by way of introduction. "The one who got Carter on tape." One of the officers, a sharp-eyed woman with cropped hair, stepped forward and offered her hand. "Officer Daniels, we've been waiting for someone like you." The other, a younger man with a serious demeanor, gave a brief nod. "Officer Patel, I've been compiling reports on Carter for months, everything from citizen complaints to buried internal reviews. We just needed the right catalyst to bring it all forward." Andre shook their hands, a sense of cautious hope building within him. "So, what's the plan?" Daniels gestured to the table in the center of the room, covered in files and photographs. "We've been documenting everything, every instance of misconduct, every cover-up. With your evidence and Ella's reach, we can put together an airtight case," Patel added, "but we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more time Carter and his allies have to get ahead of this. Andre nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Together, they worked through the night, sorting through files and organizing evidence. For the first time, Andre didn't feel alone in his fight. By the time they finished, the table was covered in neatly stacked documents, each one a damning piece of the puzzle. "This is just the beginning," Harper said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "But we're finally on the right path." Andre looked around the room at the faces of those who had risked everything to stand with him. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time, he felt the strength of solidarity. The morning light broke through the heavy clouds, its weak rays reflecting off the wet streets. Andre paced his small apartment, his phone clutched tightly in his hand as he refreshed the newsfeed for the 10th time. He had barely slept, his mind buzzing with anticipation and worry. Then it happened. The headline appeared at the top of the screen, bold and impossible to ignore. "Corruption exposed, Officer Carter's record of abuse revealed." Ella's article had gone live. Andre's heart raced as he opened the link, scanning the opening paragraphs. The story pulled no punches, laying out Carter's history of misconduct with damning clarity. Ella had woven the evidence into a narrative that was both compelling and irrefutable, backed by testimonies, documents, and the video Andre had recorded. The article named not only Carter, but hinted at a broader culture of complicity within the department. It was a call to action, a demand for accountability that was already sending shockwaves through the community. Andre's phone buzzed with notifications, messages pouring in from friends, acquaintances, and strangers alike. Many offered words of support, while others shared their own stories of encounters with officers like Carter. Just as Andre was about to respond to a text, his phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Ella. "Andre?" she said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and urgency. "It's happening. The story's spreading fast. People are already sharing it everywhere." Andre exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's good, right?" "Very good," Ella replied. "But it's also going to ruffle a lot of feathers. I've already heard from some sources in the department. Carter's furious, and he's not the only one. They're going to push back hard." Andre leaned against the wall, his stomach tightening. "What do you mean?" "Carter's already claiming the evidence is fake," Ella explained. "He's threatening legal action, saying it was obtained illegally. He's trying to discredit you, me, and anyone else involved. But don't worry, we have verified everything. They can't bury this, not now." Andre nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I figured he wouldn't go down without a fight." "He won't," Ella said, her tone serious. "But we're ready. I've got lawyers lined up, and the public is on our side." The comments on the article are already blowing up. People are demanding investigations and resignations. This is bigger than just Carter now. As they spoke, Andre refreshed the article and scrolled down to the comments section. It was flooded with reactions, some expressing outrage, others sharing personal stories of injustice, and many calling for systemic change. "This is just the beginning," Ella said. "Stay safe, Andre. Carter's desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." "I will," Andre promised. "Thank you, Ella, for everything." After ending the call, Andre set his phone down and stared out the window. The street below was quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He knew Carter wouldn't take this lying down. A knock on the door startled him, and his pulse quickened. Andre moved cautiously to the door and peered through the peephole. Relief flooded him when he saw Officer Harper standing there. Andre opened the door, stepping aside to let Harper in. The older officer's expression was grim, his jaw set tightly. "Morning, Andre," Harper said. "I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're okay." Andre gestured toward the table, where remnants of his restless night, an empty coffee mug, and a half-eaten bagel still sat. "I'm fine, just trying to process everything." "The story's lilied people are already reacting." Harper nodded, his face unreadable. "Yeah, I've seen it. The department's in chaos. Carter's going ballistic, claiming the whole thing's a setup. And his allies? They're scrambling to figure out their next move." Andre crossed his arms. "Let them. The truth is out now. They can't silence it." Harper's gaze softened slightly, a hint of admiration flickering in his tired eyes. "You've done something big, Andre, but Carter's not going to back down quietly. He's already making calls and trying to rally support. He might even try to dig into your past, looking for anything he can use against you. I've got nothing to hide, Andre said firmly. That doesn't mean they won't twist things, Harper warned. And it's not just Carter you have to worry about. There are others, people who've benefited from his corruption. They're scared right now, and scared people can be unpredictable. Andre clenched his jaw. What about the other officers? Daniels, Patel? Are they safe? For now, Harper replied. They're being careful. But this isn't over, Andre. Not by a long shot. Andre nodded, determination hardening in his chest. I'm not backing down, Harper. Not now. Not ever. Harper placed a reassuring hand on Andre's shoulder. Good, because people are watching now. The public is behind you, and that's more powerful than anything Carter's got. As Harper left, Andre felt a renewed sense of resolve. He returned to his phone and opened Ella's article again, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just about Carter. It was about the system that had allowed him to thrive. Hours passed, and the momentum continued to build. News outlets picked up Ella's story, amplifying it across the city. By afternoon, the mayor had issued a statement calling for an independent investigation into the police department. Andre watched the news coverage with a mix of relief and apprehension. The public outcry was growing, but so was the risk. Carter and his allies wouldn't go down without a fight, and Andre knew the battle was just beginning. As evening fell, Andre sat by the window watching the city lights blink against the darkening sky. His phone buzzed with another notification, a message from Ella. The mayor just announced a full investigation. This is bigger than we ever imagined. Stay safe. Andre smiled faintly, her words bolstering his spirits. He had set something in motion that couldn't be undone, and for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. But as the city settled into the quiet of the night, Andre couldn't ignore the lingering tension in the air. The storm had only just begun. The tension in the air was palpable, even as the city settled into the quiet of the evening. Andre sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring out the window. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a faint car engine idling nearby. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Though the street appeared empty, the sense of being watched gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Carter's reaction to Ella's article had been swift and as chaotic as Andre had expected. The public backlash was intense, with calls for accountability echoing across social media and the news. The mayor's announcement of an independent investigation had only added fuel to the fire. Yet Andre knew this victory was far from complete. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Officer Harper. Be careful tonight. Carter's been making moves. Andre's stomach tightened. He knew what that meant. Carter was desperate, and desperate men didn't follow the rules. The knock at his door came just after midnight, a sharp, deliberate sound that sent Andre's heart racing. He hesitated for a moment before moving to the peephole. Two figures stood outside, both in uniform. The dim light from the hallway made it difficult to make out their faces, but Andre recognized one of them immediately. Officer Daniels. He exhaled a shaky breath and opened the door. Andre, Daniels said quickly, stepping inside with Officer Patel close behind her. We don't have much time. What's going on? Andre asked, closing the door and locking it behind them. Patel's expression was grim as he placed a thick folder on the table. Carter's panicking. He knows the investigation is going to dig up everything. He's trying to discredit you, but it's worse than that. Daniels added, We have reason to believe he's planning to come after you personally. He's already got people watching you. Andre's mind raced. Watching me? For what? I haven't done anything wrong. That doesn't matter to him, Patel said. If he can't bury the evidence, he'll try to intimidate you into backing down, or worse. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Patel's words hanging heavy in the air. What do we do? Andre finally asked. Daniels exchanged a glance with Patel before speaking. We've compiled everything we have into one final report. It's detailed, cross-referenced, and airtight. If anything happens to you, we want it to be clear who's responsible. Andre looked at the folder, his chest tightening. This feels like a last resort. It is, Patel said quietly. But we're not going to let it come to that. We're here to protect you, Andre. And we're not the only ones. Harper's been coordinating with a few others. We've got people watching Carter's movements. Daniels stepped closer, her voice firm. You need to stay vigilant. Keep your phone on you at all times. If anything feels off, call one of us immediately. Don't take any chances. Andre nodded, a mix of gratitude and fear swelling in his chest. Thank you. Both of you. I don't know if I could do this without your support. Daniels placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're not alone in this, Andre. We're going to see it through together. As the officers left, Andre locked the door and leaned against it, his mind a storm of thoughts. He had known from the start that taking on someone like Carter wouldn't be easy, but the reality of the danger he now faced was sinking in. The folder on the table seemed to taunt him, a reminder of just how high the stakes had become. Andre reached for his phone, scrolling through the messages from Ella, Harper, and others who had shown their support. Each one was a small beacon of hope, a reminder that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. But the sense of unease refused to leave him. Hours later, as Andre lay in bed, his body exhausted but his mind refusing to rest, a noise from outside his window made him sit bolt upright. He held his breath, listening intently. The faint sound of footsteps on wet pavement reached his ears, followed by the unmistakable creak of someone leaning against the building's exterior. Andre's heart pounded as he grabbed his phone and moved cautiously toward the window. Peering through the curtains, he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing just beyond the pool of light cast by the street lamp. The figure turned slightly, revealing a face Andre recognized instantly. Carter. A chill ran down his spine as their eyes met, even through the distance and the glass. Carter's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his stance spoke volumes. Andre stepped back, his hands shaking as he dialed Harper's number. The call connected after a single ring. Andre whispered urgently, "Carter's outside. He's here." "Stay inside," Harper replied immediately, his voice calm but commanding. "Lock your doors and don't confront him. I'm on my way." The line went dead, leaving Andre alone with the weight of Harper's instructions. He double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, his adrenaline surging as he tried to steady his breathing. Outside, Carter hadn't moved. He stood like a statue, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Minutes felt like hours as Andre waited, every creak of the apartment building making him flinch. Finally, the sound of a car approaching broke the tension. A patrol car pulled up to the curb, and Harper stepped out, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Carter turned at the sound, his posture stiffening. Harper approached him with measured steps, his voice low but firm. Though Andre couldn't hear their exchange, the tension was clear. After a few moments, Carter backed away, his expression tight with barely restrained anger. Harper watched him leave before walking up to Andre's door. Andre unlocked it quickly, letting him inside. "He's gone," Harper said, his voice steady. "But that was a warning, Andre. He's trying to intimidate you." Andre ran a hand over his face, the weight of the encounter settling over him. "What do we do now?" "We keep moving forward," Harper replied. "The investigation is gaining momentum, and Carter knows he's losing control. That's why he's acting out. But it's also why we can't stop now." Andre nodded, a flicker of determination reigniting within him. "Let's finish this." The next morning brought a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under a blanket of thin clouds. Despite the calm outside, Andre could feel the storm brewing within the city. The events of the previous night, Carter's silent appearance and Harper's intervention, lingered in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Social media platforms were abuzz with reactions to Ella's article and the growing calls for accountability. Hashtags like #JusticeForThePeople and Expose Corruption were trending, and videos of Andre's initial confrontation with Carter had gone viral. Andre sat at his kitchen table scrolling through the flood of comments. Finally, someone standing up to these bullies in uniform. "Carter represents everything wrong with the system. We need change. Andre, you're a hero. Stay safe. We're with you." Messages of support poured in, bolstering his resolve. But mixed within them were the darker, more insidious messages, threats, accusations, and attempts to discredit him. "This guy is just looking for attention. Fake evidence. Fake story. Another fraud is trying to ruin a good cop's career. Careful, Andre. People like you don't last long. Andre's jaw tightened, but he refused to let the negativity shake him. He had expected this backlash. Carter and his allies were desperate to muddy the waters, to paint Andre as the villain. A call from Ella pulled him from his thoughts. "Andre," she began, her voice steady but serious. "The mayor just announced that an independent task force will be reviewing all misconduct complaints in the department. This is huge." Andre leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. "That's progress," he said cautiously. "It is," Ella agreed, "but it's also making Carter's allies nervous. A few anonymous tips have already come in about officers destroying files and trying to cover their tracks. If we're going to keep the pressure on, we need to act fast." Andre's chest tightened. "What can I do?" "Just keep your head down for now," Ella replied. "We've got momentum and the public is on our side. Harper and his team are keeping watch, and I've got more sources digging into Carter's past. But Andre, be careful. The more progress we make, the more dangerous this gets." "Understood," Andre said. Later that day, Andre received a message from Harper asking him to meet at the community center. When he arrived, he found Harper, Daniels, and Patel waiting for him, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and determination. "The mayor's announcement is putting the department under a microscope," Harper said as Andre sat down. "It's a step in the right direction, but it's also putting a target on anyone involved in this." Daniels nodded. "We're already hearing whispers of officers being pressured to stay silent, and some are pushing back. The department is more divided than ever." "What about Carter?" Andre asked. "He's laying low for now," Patel said. "But his allies are trying to shift the narrative. They're claiming this is all a vendetta against law enforcement, trying to turn public opinion against you." Andre frowned. "And is it working?" Harper shook his head. "Not yet. The public outcry is too strong and people are tired of the same old excuses, but it's only a matter of time before they try something bigger." Andre leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Then we need to stay ahead of them." "What's the next move?" Daniels pulled out a laptop and placed it on the table, opening a folder filled with scanned documents and video files. "This," she said, "the USB you gave us has more than enough to implicate Carter and several others. But we need to release it strategically. If we dump everything at once, they'll claim it's fabricated or taken out of context." Patel added, "We've been working with Ella to compile a timeline, a clear, step-by-step account of every complaint and cover-up. Once we release it, it'll be impossible for them to deny." Andre nodded, his determination hardening. "Let's do it." That evening, Ella released the first wave of evidence, focusing on Carter's history of misconduct and the department's repeated failures to address it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets picked up the story, interviews with former victims aired on primetime television, and protests began forming outside the police department. Andre watched the coverage from his living room, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Seeing the faces of those who had suffered under Carter's abuse, their voices finally being heard, gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. One of the interviews hit particularly hard. A young woman named Mia recounted an incident where Carter had falsely arrested her during a traffic stop, humiliating her in front of her children. Her voice trembled as she described the fear and helplessness she had felt. Andre clenched his fists, anger simmering just beneath the surface. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. This was about every person who had been silenced, every injustice that had been swept under the rug. As the protests grew, so did the backlash. Carter's allies began feeding stories to sympathetic media outlets, painting him as a victim of a witch hunt. Anonymous social media accounts spread conspiracy theories, accusing Andre and Ella of fabricating the evidence for personal gain. But the truth was too powerful to ignore. Each new piece of evidence released by Ella and her team only strengthened the case against Carter. By the end of the week, the city's district attorney announced a preliminary investigation into Carter and his closest associates. Andre's phone buzzed with a message from Ella. "We're making progress, but it's getting dangerous. Stay vigilant," he replied quickly. "I will. Thank you." That night, Andre stood by his window, Sabat, looking out at the city. The protests below were still going strong, and a sea of people were holding signs and chanting for change. It was a sight that filled him with both hope and apprehension. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Andre felt the tide beginning to turn. The system that had protected people like Carter for so long was finally being forced to confront its failures. As he watched the crowd, Andre whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." The city buzzed with tension as the investigation into Officer Carter gained traction. Each day brought new revelations, and the momentum for accountability grew stronger. Protests swelled in numbers, their chants echoing through the streets. No more cover-ups, and justice for all. Andre watched the unfolding events with a mix of hope and apprehension. From his apartment window, he could see the crowd gathered in front of the police department, their signs a sea of righteous anger. It was empowering, but also daunting. This fight was no longer just his own. It had become a movement. One evening, a knock at the door broke Andre from his thoughts. He approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Harper standing there. The older officer's expression was serious but calm. "We need to talk," Harper said as Andre opened the door. They sat at the kitchen table, where Harper placed a thick envelope in front of him. "This just came to my desk," Harper began, his tone grave. "It's from one of Carter's allies, sent anonymously. They're trying to discredit you." Andre opened the envelope and sifted through the contents. Grainy photos of him at protests, heavily edited videos of him speaking out against police misconduct, and a fabricated arrest record. Each piece was an obvious attempt to paint him as a troublemaker rather than a whistleblower. Andre's stomach churned, but he kept his composure. "This is what they're resorting to." Harper nodded. "They're desperate. The investigation is closing in, and they know it. Carter's not just a bad cop, he's the linchpin of a network of corruption. If he goes down, he's taking others with him. That's why they're scrambling to discredit you before the truth fully comes out." Andre leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "So what do we do? How do we fight this?" Harper's gaze was steady. "By staying focused. Ella's timeline is airtight, and the task force is making progress. They've already subpoenaed Carter's records and are interviewing his former partners. This smear campaign is their last-ditch effort to distract from what's coming." Later that night, Andre called Ella to update her. As always, she listened intently, her sharp mind piecing things together. "This is expected," she said, her voice steady. "Carter and his allies don't have a real defense, so they're resorting to cheap tactics. But we're ready for this. I've got more evidence going live tomorrow, and this time, it's going to hit harder than ever." "What is it?" Andre asked. Ella hesitated for a moment. "It's the connection between Carter and several high-ranking officials in the department. Financial records, internal emails, even surveillance footage, it's all there. Once this is out, the entire department will be under scrutiny." Andre felt his pulse quicken. "That's going to cause a firestorm." "It will," Ella agreed. "But it's what we need to push this over the edge. The public is on our side, Andre, and with this new evidence, there'll be no denying the extent of the corruption." The next day, Ella's report broke, and the city erupted. The evidence laid bare a web of misconduct and cover-ups that reached far beyond Carter. High-ranking officials were implicated, their names splashed across headlines and trending hashtags. News outlets dissected the report with fervor, and panel discussions analyzed the implications and called for immediate action. Protesters marched with renewed vigor, their chants louder than ever. Andre watched it all unfold, a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation coursing through him. They were winning, but the stakes had never been higher. That evening, as Andre prepared for another restless night, his phone buzzed with a message from Patel. "Meet us at the safe house. We've uncovered something big." Andre's chest tightened. He grabbed his jacket and hurried out the door, Harper already waiting outside in his car. The ride was silent, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived at the nondescript community center, Daniels and Patel were already inside, their faces grim as they pored over a series of documents spread across the table. "What's going on?" Andre asked, stepping closer. Daniels gestured to the papers. "We found a record of payments, large sums transferred from an anonymous account directly to Carter and several other officers. The timing matches up with some of the biggest cover-ups in the department's history." Patel added, "This isn't just about misconduct anymore. This is organized corruption, bribes, hush money, and likely connections to external criminal networks." Andre stared at the documents, his mind racing. This changes everything. Daniels nodded. It does. And it means the people behind this won't stop trying to discredit you. They'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Harper's voice was steady but firm. We need to get this to Ella and the task force immediately. The longer we hold on to it, the more danger we're in. As the team worked to scan and encrypt the files, the weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. Andre couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Carter, or someone more powerful, was already one step ahead. The sense of unease followed him as they left the safe house later that night, Harper driving him back to his apartment under the cover of darkness. Stay inside, Harper instructed as they pulled up to Andre's building. And keep your phone on. We're too close to the truth now for them to ignore us. Andre nodded, his resolve hardening. We'll finish this. No matter what. The night passed in fits of restless sleep. Andre awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing with another update from Ella. We've submitted everything to the task force. The DA's office is calling for immediate suspensions and criminal charges. This is it, Andre. He let out a slow breath, his body buzzing with adrenaline. The endgame was in sight, but he knew it wouldn't come without a fight. The next morning, the city braced for the fallout. News broke that Carter and several high-ranking officers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Arrest warrants for 2 officers accused of accepting bribes were issued. Outside the department, the protests reached a fever pitch, the crowd swelling with people demanding systemic change. Andre watched from his apartment window, a mix of pride and apprehension filling him. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning, and the truth was finally coming to light. The city was electric with the fallout of the latest revelations. Carter's suspension had sent shockwaves through the department, and the arrests of 2 officers tied to the bribery scandal had confirmed what many had suspected for years. Corruption was deeply ingrained in the system. Andre sat on the edge of his couch, the morning news playing on the television. The anchors' voices were filled with urgency as they recounted the unfolding events. This morning, the district attorney's office announced a full-scale investigation into allegations of misconduct and corruption within the city's police department, one anchor reported. Sources confirm that several high-ranking officers have been implicated, and public calls for a leadership overhaul are growing louder. The screen cut to footage of the protests outside the department's headquarters. The crowd had grown significantly, and their chants were a unified cry for justice. Signs bearing messages like accountability now and no more corruption filled the air. Andre's phone buzzed with a call from Ella. He picked up immediately. Andre, are you watching this? She asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and exhaustion. I am, he replied. It's surreal. Did you expect it to move this fast? I hoped it would, Ella said. The public pressure is making it impossible for them to sweep this under the rug. But you need to be careful, Andre. Carter isn't done, and neither are his allies. Andre frowned. What do you mean? There are rumors that Carter's trying to cut a deal, Ella explained. He's threatening to take others down with him if they don't protect him. It's chaos inside the department right now. Andre sighed, his grip tightening on the phone. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous. It does, Ella agreed, but it also means we're winning. Just stay vigilant. Harper and his team are still keeping an eye on things, and I'll let you know if I hear anything. Thanks, Ella. For everything, Andre said. Don't thank me yet, she replied. We're not done. Later that day, Harper stopped by Andre's apartment. His expression was tense as he stepped inside, carrying a folder under one arm. Carter's making moves, Harper said without preamble. He's trying to negotiate with the DA's office, offering names and evidence in exchange for leniency. But it's not just about saving himself. He's trying to shift the blame entirely. Andre leaned against the kitchen counter, his jaw tightening. What's his angle? He's claiming that the corruption was isolated to a few individuals, Harper explained, setting the folder on the table. He's painting himself as someone who just got caught up in it, not the ringleader. If he succeeds, it'll deflect attention from the broader systemic issues. Andre shook his head in frustration. After everything he's done, he's still trying to manipulate the narrative. That's why we need to stay ahead of him, Harper said. The task force is already seeing through his lies, but public perception matters too. Ella's next release will focus on Carter's role as the orchestrator of much of this corruption. We're making sure his legacy is one of accountability, not excuses. Andre nodded, determination hardening his resolve. Good, he can't be allowed to escape this. As evening fell, Andre found himself standing at his window, watching the city below. The streets were quieter now, the energy of the day giving way to the anticipation of what was to come. The fight felt like it was reaching its peak, and Andre knew the next few days would be critical. A sudden noise from the hallway snapped him out of his thoughts. A loud, deliberate knock echoed through the apartment. Andre's heart raced as he approached the door, his mind flashing back to Carter's unannounced visit just days earlier. Peering through the peephole, he was met with a familiar face, Officer Daniels. Andre quickly unlocked the door and let her in. "Daniels, what's going on?" he asked, noting the urgency in her expression. "We've got a situation," she said, stepping inside. "Carter's trying to frame this as a vendetta against law enforcement. He's calling in favors, trying to rally support from officers who are still loyal to him. They're planning to hold a press conference tomorrow to counter the narrative." Andre's chest tightened. "And what are they going to say?" "Everything you'd expect," Daniels replied. "That this is an attack on good cops, that the evidence is fabricated, that you're just an agitator looking for attention. It's all lies, but if they control the narrative, it could undermine everything we've worked for." Andre clenched his fists. "So what do we do?" Daniels gave him a determined look. "We fight back. Ella and the task force are preparing a counterstatement, and Patel is working on releasing another batch of evidence. But we need you to speak, Andre. The public needs to hear from you directly." Andre hesitated. He had never sought the spotlight. His goal had always been justice, not attention. But Daniels was right. If he stayed silent now, it could give Carter the opening he needed to regain control. "I'll do it," Andre said finally. "Whatever it takes to make sure the truth isn't buried." The next morning, Andre stood on the steps of City Hall, flanked by Daniels, Patel, Harper, and Ella. A small crowd had gathered, along with reporters and camera crews. The air was heavy with anticipation as Andre stepped up to the microphone. He took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over him. "My name is Andre Phillips," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "I never asked to be in this position. I'm not a politician, an activist, or a public figure. I'm just a citizen who was tired of being silent." The crowd quieted, their attention fixed on him. "When Officer Carter pulled me over that night, he thought he could use his authority to intimidate me, to silence me. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't just one person. I represent every person who has ever been mistreated, every voice that has been ignored, and every story that has been buried." Andre paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "This isn't just about one bad cop. This is about a system that allows people like Carter to thrive. A system that protects abusers instead of holding them accountable. That needs to change." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Andre stepped back, his heart pounding, but his resolve stronger than ever. As the press conference continued, Andre felt a sense of clarity. Carter's press conference might still happen, but it wouldn't matter. The truth was too loud to be ignored now. The applause from the press conference still echoed in Andre's ears as he returned to his apartment that evening. The energy of the crowd, the chance for justice, and the flood of questions from reporters had been overwhelming, but it was also empowering. For the first time, Andre felt like he had taken control of the narrative. Ella called shortly after he got home, her voice carrying an unmistakable tone of excitement. "Andre, you did it," she said. "The press is eating it up. Your speech is all over the news, and Carter's press conference has been postponed indefinitely." Andre let out a breath of relief. "Do you think it's enough to stop him?" "It's enough to corner him," Ella replied. "The task force has officially announced that they're expanding the investigation into his associates. Arrests are imminent, and Carter knows it. He's running out of moves." Andre nodded, his mind racing. "What about the public? Are they still with us?" "They're more fired up than ever," Ella assured him. "The protests have grown, and support is pouring in from all over the country. People are demanding systemic reform, not just accountability for Carter. Andre felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just his fight anymore, it was a movement. The next morning, the news broke. Carter had been arrested. He was taken into custody on charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. Images of him being led out of his home in handcuffs flooded the airwaves, a stark contrast to the confident, untouchable figure he had once been. Andre watched the coverage from his couch, his emotions a mixture of relief and disbelief. Carter's downfall was monumental, but it was also just the beginning. Ella called him again, her excitement barely contained. "Andre, did you see the news?" she asked. "I saw it," he replied. "It feels surreal." "It's real," Ella said. "But you're right. This is just the start. The task force has announced a full audit of the department, and they're uncovering more every day." Carter's arrest is a symbol, but the real work is going to be dismantling the system that allowed him to operate unchecked. Andre nodded. "What can I do to help?" Ella paused, her tone turning thoughtful. "Keep telling your story. Keep fighting for the people who don't have a voice. You've already made an incredible impact, but there's so much more to do." Over the next few weeks, the city began to change. The protests continued, but they evolved from expressions of anger to calls for action. Community leaders, activists, and even some officers within the department joined the movement, pushing for reforms that would ensure accountability and transparency. Andre found himself at the center of it all. He attended meetings, spoke at rallies, and worked closely with Ella and her team to keep the momentum alive. His story became a rallying cry, a testament to the power of ordinary people standing up against injustice. But it wasn't without its challenges. The backlash from Carter's allies didn't disappear overnight. Andre received threats, his integrity was questioned, and there were moments when the weight of it all felt like too much to bear. In those moments, he turned to the people who had stood by him: Harper, Daniels, Patel, and Ella. They reminded him why he had started this fight in the first place and gave him the strength to keep going. Months later, the reforms began to take shape. The city announced the creation of a civilian oversight board to review complaints against the police. Body cameras became mandatory, and officers found guilty of misconduct were swiftly removed from their positions. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much work to be done, but it was a start. Andre stood on the steps of City Hall as the mayor addressed the crowd, outlining the new policies and thanking the citizens who had pushed for change. When the mayor mentioned his name, the crowd erupted in cheers. Andre stepped forward, taking the microphone. "This isn't about me," he began, his voice strong and steady. "This is about all of us, about every person who has ever been silenced, ignored, or mistreated. This is about making sure no one has to go through what we went through ever again." The crowd roared in approval, their energy a testament to the movement's strength. That evening, Andre returned home, the weight of the journey finally beginning to lift. He sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Ella called, her voice warm and filled with pride. "Andre, you've done something incredible," she said. "You've changed this city." "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "None of us did." "That's true," Ella agreed. "But it started with you, with one person refusing to back down." Andre smiled, the truth of her words settling over him. "Thank you, Ella, for everything. Get some rest," she said. "You've earned it." The next morning, Andre woke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. The sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. As he got ready for the day, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. What had started as a single act of defiance had grown into a movement that changed the city. There was still work to be done, and Andre knew the fight for justice was never truly over. But for the first time, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the future. As he stepped outside, the air felt crisp and clean, as if the city itself had been renewed. Andre walked with a sense of purpose, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead was long, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Andre's actions inspired others across the country, sparking similar movements in cities facing their own battles against corruption and injustice. His name became synonymous with resilience, and his story was a reminder that even the smallest voice could make a difference. For Andre, It was never about recognition or fame. It was about justice, accountability, and the belief that change was possible. And as the sun rose on a new day, André knew that the fight was worth it. The story of André is more than just a tale of courage. It's a profound reminder of the power of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seem insurmountable. André's journey, from being a lone voice confronting abuse to sparking a movement for change, demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of speaking truth to power. The video serves as a stark critique of systemic failures and the consequences of unchecked authority. It sheds light on the pain and frustration felt by countless individuals who have been silenced by fear or oppression. Yet, it also offers a glimmer of hope that through determination, solidarity, and a refusal to give up, real change is possible. One of the most compelling lessons from André's story is the impact one person can have when they decide enough is enough. His courage inspired others to step forward. His actions united a community, and his persistence forced a corrupt system to confront its failings. This narrative underscores that justice isn't a given. It's something that must be fought for. And it requires the collective efforts of individuals willing to stand for what's right. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? Did it make you reflect on your own experiences or the injustices you see around you? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. Let us know how this resonated with you, and share your own stories in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay connected to meaningful stories like this one. Together, we can amplify these voices and spark conversations that lead to change. Share your thoughts and reflections. We're eager to hear what you think.